Welcome to the Gold Standard here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and as usual, we have not talked about how we're going to introduce ourselves, so take it away, boys and girls.
I'm Emma Lingan, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
I'm Michael Gallagher. I'm just a guy without a place to write.
All right, so lots of stuff to do today. Good to see both of you guys. How's everybody doing? I'm terrible, by the way. I just want to point that out. How are you guys?
I was going to say, I think we're doing better than you are.
Yeah.
That's not saying much, though.
Brutal, just brutal. When is the last time? We got a lot of hockey to discuss today, but real question here. When is the last time either of you got stung by a wasp or a bee? Seriously.
Honestly, not that long ago was when I was on vacation. We were up in Michigan.
Really?
I got stung right on the neck by a yellow jacket, and it hurt.
Damn.
I got stung by a yellow jacket on my first day of kindergarten, and it was very traumatic, and knock on wood, have not been stung since. I've been bitten by some weird things since then, but that was my last sting. It was very traumatic.
I have some follow-ups about the weird things that have bitten you, but have
you ever been to Texas? There's some weird shit down there.
Yes, there is. Yeah, I lived in Texas for 6 years. You're absolutely correct. So I was like out in the backyard yesterday, and I just hear this buzzing in my ear, and all of a sudden it starts to hurt real bad, and I start smacking at it. And then he came back for more and got me like on the left side of the face and like the chin, and he got me like 3 times. And then I went inside and destroyed his whole family. So it's fine. I took the nest out, but man, that hurt it was a yellow jacket as well. And I was walking around with like a wrestler ear, like cauliflower ear all day yesterday. It was terrible. Nate's in the comments already. Welcome to the show with Askarov and LaRue, big personalities. Here we go. Chirping goalie after scoring and a penalized. I'm concerned Trotz will put culture over talent since the Preds have had one player bigger than life, PK. By the way, side note, PK Subban, I think he's doing an excellent job as a broadcaster. I don't know about you guys, but I think he's great TV. What do you think? PK doing pretty good?
I think he's really entertaining.
I think he's good. Honestly, the overall throughout the season, I have preferred generally the TNT broadcast to the ESPN broadcast, but I think PK is one of the few good things about the ESPN broadcast and now ABC for the final.
He has a good mix of former player, analyst, analytical side of it, and also like the personality fun side relating to the casual fan, which need more of with the NHL coverage. Big major networks.
I agree with you, Emma. I like the other broadcast team holistically, I think. But I really think PK is doing a good job. I just think he's growing, and I think he's getting better, and I think he's really, really good. So Messier won't really say much. He just sort of says the thing that's obvious. And then, PK is doing a great job. So we'll get to the Cup Final, of course, back to Edmonton. They all got to take that long flight back to Edmonton from Sunrise, which I can't, outside of Vancouver to Miami, I can't imagine there's a longer flight. Honestly, in the NHL, maybe the second longest flight in the NHL. I don't know. Emma, you've been on a lot of long flights. What's the longest flight you've ever been on in the NHL?
Well, I've never gone from Miami to Vancouver. We went from Miami to Chicago, I think. That was kind of long. I think the longest, though, for me, I mean, this goes without saying, but Nashville to Vancouver was probably the longest. And first time we did that with Andrew Burnett, we got right off the plane and went straight to practice when we got to Vancouver. It was a very long day. And the flight to Vancouver is always longer than the flight back because of, I don't know, wind and I don't know.
The prevailing trade winds, something like that. I don't know. That makes me sound. I feel like that makes me sound smart. Having just flown to London, and it's like 8 hours to get there and 9 hours to get back. I'm assuming that is because of wind.
Yeah.
So lots of fun stuff. Look, the 6-hour flight back from Miami up to Edmonton for Game 6. Connor McDavid doing all kinds of hysterical things, and we'll talk about that. Obviously, Patrick Laine has been mentioned on Twitter by one of our hosts here on the show, and we'll discuss going after Patrick Laine. I think he's a really interesting case study in the strategy that Barry Trotz has said he doesn't want to deploy, which is spending big on a big name topic. We've discussed a few of those names. Most of the time, both of you kind of sort of say, no to Marner, no to Stamkos, no to a big name unless they're sort of younger and can contribute for longer. Well, Patrick Laine is only 25 right now. He'll play this past season, or maybe he just turned 26. He'll be 26 this season. So we'll get into some Patrick Laine stuff. There's some more Juuse Saros rumors and, of course, some last-minute draft stuff as well. Next week, quick news and notes, though. Next week, of course, all draft coverage for the squad leading into the first round on Friday night, and then all the second round through all the picks they've got on Saturday. And we've got some news for you on Monday. So I'll just say stay tuned. If you're a Predators fan, we've got some news for you on Monday. Stay tuned to the Twitter sphere. We might have something on the podcast feed as well, but just stay tuned. Monday, we've got some plans for you guys. I'm really, really excited about it, and I think Predators fans should be very, very excited about it. So we'll have some news for you on Monday. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. Okay. All right. Let's quickly touch on the Cup here. And I just Connor McDavid has already broken the assist record in the NHL for the playoffs. That's 34 assists. He has taken over the last 2 games. They score 8 goals. Not him personally. That'd be a record. He scores 8 goals. They score 8 goals in game 4. They go down to Florida. They sort of jump on him early. He scores more points. Leon Draisaitl gets involved. You've got Zach Hyman with 15 goals. So basically, you've got these Edmonton Oilers breaking records. And my first question to you guys, he's probably the Conn Smythe winner, but is it too little too late to give him the Conn Smythe? I mean, the Panthers still have 2 games to close this series out. Chances are, statistically, they're going to win the Cup here. Do you think he's won the Conn Smythe with the way he's played and the way he's taken over? Is this a new moment for Connor McDavid, or is it still Bobrovsky's award to lose?
I mean, I think if Edmonton wins, then McDavid gets it. And as far as the too little too late argument, like if it was anyone other than McDavid, maybe. But yeah, I think that he's just doing exactly what we would expect him to do, and would not be surprised if he won it.
Yeah, I mean, if you go with the spirit of the award, it's supposed to be given to the player most valuable to their team. I don't think you can argue Bobrovsky's more valuable to the Panthers than McDavid is to the Oilers right now. And even if Florida wins the Cup, I say give it to him. It's kind of like the whole same thing of, do you give the Super Bowl MVP to a player on the losing team? Like, I think if the player deserves the award, regardless of whether their team won or lost, it should be given to you. And I think to Emma's point, if it was anyone other than Connor McDavid, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But because he is Connor McDavid, like, yeah, absolutely. I think he's the one person you make an exception for. And if he plays, another 2 more games like he did his last 2 games, even if Edmonton loses, I don't know how you can justify giving the award to anyone other than him.
And it's not like it's a first time thing. Like the Conn Smythe has gone to a player on a losing team before. The Super Bowl MVP has gone to a player on the losing team before. It was a long, long time ago, but it's happened. Connor McDavid, 42 points this postseason. That is 4th all time. He is 1 point from Gretzky. Then you've got Lemieux at 2nd place with 44, and then Gretzky with 47. So he is 5 points away from the greatest postseason production-wise in the history of the NHL. And so I think
if you take Connor McDavid's postseason and put him on the Preds, he would be like their 6th leading scorer.
That's not funny. It's not funny.
He would be in between Tommy Novak and Luke Evangelista.
Yeah, it's not funny. 34 assists is the record, of course. And here's the other thing. It's not just that he's at 42 points, but like obviously he played his best 2 games in the finals when they were facing elimination. I believe they're 4-0 in the postseason when facing elimination. He's only the 2nd player since 1993 to top 35 points in a postseason. And that was Evgeny Malkin in 2009. He had 36 points. Kucherov had 34 in 2020. But honestly, this is all guys in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s that have done this. So it's not only just historically great, but it's like it's great for like this era of hockey as well. It's the greatest postseason production that we've ever seen from a player. And I don't have a problem with him getting the Conn Smythe, even if they lose. I don't have a problem with that at all.
I also feel like somehow he's also done it rather quietly, like for McDavid standards. I mean, like he had kind of a slow start to the again, slow by his standards, to the postseason, and like other teams, Vancouver was able to shut him down pretty well, and like some of these, it just seems like he's very quietly somehow amassed all of these points. And I don't know how, when you're Connor McDavid, you can quietly do anything, but that's how it feels to me.
Well, I feel like also too, having a teammate like Leon Draisaitl that has, scored a few more goals. McDavid's more of a point producer, and Draisaitl's like the pure goal scorer. He can get overshadowed a little bit just because of how good Draisaitl is. But I mean, if you look at the first two games of the Stanley Cup Final, he had 0 points in game one. They lost 3-0. He had 1 assist in game two. They lost 4-0. He had 2 assists, played a typical Connor McDavid game. They still lost, but it was 4-3, and it was closer than the last 2 games, 8 points, and they won both of them. Like, this team doesn't get going until Connor McDavid gets going. And I don't think you can say that really about anyone else on the Panthers, because they're a little bit deeper. They have more, I don't know, a more well-rounded roster, I guess you could say. But if Matthew Tkachuk isn't on his game, you have Barkov and you have a bunch of other guys that can pick up the slack. If McDavid's not playing like McDavid, the rest of the team, it's kind of a trickle-down effect. The rest of the team feels that.
Well, and I think you're seeing, we talked about this going into the series, but you're seeing, I want to say every single game so far has rated higher than last year's Stanley Cup Final. So people are paying attention, but you best believe that it's much, much easier to draw ratings when the best player on the planet is scoring a bunch of points and breaking records, and the series is a little bit more even. What's interesting is that, and I think they did say this in the pregame, there hasn't really been like a truly evenly matched game. I mean, even maybe game 5 was that. Maybe we could say that about last night's game, that they played a little bit more evenly and it felt more back and forth. But like, it's kind of been all Florida, or in game 4, all Edmonton. And I'm wondering if these next couple of games, or this next game or whatever, we finally get that like triple overtime thing that we've all been waiting for. But interesting to see. Zach Hyman, by the way, 15 goals this season in the postseason. He gets 1 more. If he gets to 16, that'll be the most in the postseason in the NHL since Joe Sakic did it in 1996. Do you know the record for most goals scored in a postseason in the NHL? Do either of you know? I'm gonna put you on the spot because I would not have known this at all.
It's got to be Gretzky, right?
I don't think Gretzky's even in the I don't think he's even up there.
I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna guess.
It's one of his
26.
teammates.
26.
Emma. So it was one of it. It was one of his teammates. Yari Curry scored 19 goals for Edmonton in '85, and is the record holder, along with Reggie Leach from Philadelphia in 1976, 19 goals. Zach Hyman, a couple goals away from being one of the greatest goal-scoring postseasons of all time, and he's like their 5th best player. So it's fascinating to watch this team perform. So we'll see. Just keep an eye on the series. We're just talking a little hockey here. Look, Stanley Cup Final. All right, so one of the things I started looking at, I was looking at the salary caps for both Edmonton and for Florida. The 2 best teams left, of course. You got Vegas last year against Florida. Florida, of course, was in it last year. And I started looking at the numbers. And this is going to all wind back to Patrick Laine. But Roman Josi would be the 4th highest paid player on the Panthers. 4th highest paid player. He would be the 3rd highest paid player on Edmonton. Philip Forsberg would be like the 4th highest paid player on Edmonton and the 5th highest paid player on Florida. And it got me thinking about the strategy of spending big. And we've kind of had this debate, and there's a lot of data folks out there that have said, look, you got to have a top 2 or 3 or 4 pick, an elite top flight player to win a cup. Nobody's done it without that type of player in a long time, or very few teams get to do it. Laine, of course, was number 2 overall. He is getting paid $8.7 million, which still would not even make him the highest paid player on the team if they were to trade for him. He's only got 2 years left on his contract, and he's only 25 or 26, depending on his birthday. He'll play this year at 26. So before we get to Laine specifically, I just want to have an open discussion about Barry Trotz's strategy about spending on a big player. If the player is worth it, why would we just automatically say we shouldn't do that? Is it because of where this franchise is located in the rebuild process, and that they're still sort of near the bottom of the process and still trying to build to come back to relevance and compete for a division championship? I mean, $10 million for Bobrovsky, $10 million for Barkov, $9.5 million for Tkachuk. Obviously, McDavid and Nurse and Draisaitl all make a ton of money. Like, you got to pay big name stars if you want to play on great teams. So, is it the right strategy to just say automatically, no, we're not going to spend big on another big contract?
I think, to your point, it has more to do with where the Predators are in their like organizational timeline of like, This team is still a few years away from being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And so you don't want to pay all of these guys right now, especially like a guy who has 2 years left or something like that. Then because if you're not going to be in that window, then it doesn't make sense to throw money at something that's not going to help you during your actual window.
Yeah, I think part of it too is fans still don't know how to feel about the team because they still don't know the direction the team is going. Like if they trade Saros, then it kind of signals like, okay, we're still in the rebuild. We're still figuring things out. If they keep Saros and they trade for somebody or they have another big name free agent, then that kind of signals like, okay, we're going for it. We're kind of in win now mode. And I think fans don't know how to feel because they could see it going either way. And it really depends on what happens with Saros and Askarov. So I think that's kind of the argument to not spending big until Barry Trotz comes out and says, hey, like we are going for it, or hey, we're trading Saros. We're still committed to the rebuild. But I would also argue, like, I do think Emma's right. Like they probably are with the roster they have now a few years away. But if you trade for Laine and you somehow trade for Necas and then you sign Montour, I would argue you're closer to being a cup contender in a year or two.
That's all? That's all they got to do?
Yeah, but you don't get those pieces without like trading Saros. I feel like there's no way. And so I don't know. Maybe not no way, but it seems unlikely.
I think if you keep Saros and you add Laine and Necas and you can go out and you get like a Montour or a Zadorov or one of the big name defensemen, I think with the players you have last year, and if you're keeping Saros and with everything we saw Andrew Brunette do, I think you're a year or two away from being a legit contender. I'm not saying you're going to win the cup, but I'm saying you're in that area of being a legit contender for the cup.
I think you could get, I think best case scenario, Barry Trotz pulls like some magician shit. I think you can get 2 of those 4 players. I don't think you can get 3 of them, maybe, and certainly not 4 of them. So if you tell me 3, if you tell me, well, no, you added Zadorov in there too. One of the 2 defensemen and then two scoring forwards. 3 seems almost impossible. I don't know how you have space or equity to go get those guys. Do I think you've got the capital to trade for Patrick Laine, hypothetically, and sign Brandon Montour? Yes, I think you could do that.
Okay.
Those two pieces would work.
Let me clarify. If you're trading for Necas, you're not paying him more than like $6 million a year. If you're trading for Laine, then Columbus is going to have to retain minimum 40% of his salary, if not more. That's how you make it work. If you go out and you sign Montour for $4.5 million a year, and you get Necas for $6 million a year, and you somehow get Laine for $4.5 million a year, you're not spending that much more money than you would be if you're adding a couple more pieces than you're probably going to add this offseason.
I don't disagree. There's lots of space.
For me, Laine, like if Columbus isn't going to retain salary, that's a non-starter for me. I feel like they have to. Yeah,
Columbus has to retain at least 40% of his salary for a deal to work for the Preds for it to make sense. You're probably going to want them to do 50, but if they won't go 40%, then you leave Laine alone because, like you said, he just turned 26 in April. So, like, he just turned 26. He's very young, and he's someone who has multiple 30-goal seasons under his belt. He has a 44-goal season. I'm not holding the 3 years in Columbus against him because it's Columbus, and he was still a point-per-game player, even though he was injured quite a bit. 56 points in 56 games in 21, 52 points, 55 games in 22. I know he only played 18 games this year because he's in the player assistance program, but you're talking about a young elite goal scorer, someone who has a track record of doing it, and you know he can do it against your division rivals because he was in your division. He was putting up 44 goals playing for Winnipeg. So I just think if you have a chance to go get someone like that, if you can convince Columbus to retain the salary you need to make it work, you absolutely pull the trigger on a trade like that because Laine is the type of player that this franchise hasn't really had.
Side note, was anyone else surprised to see that Laine is only 26? I don't know why. In my head, I feel like he was at least like 28, 29. It feels like
he's 7 seasons. He's played 7 seasons. How the hell is he only 26?
I know.
Not many players have scored 36 goals at 18 years old.
I know,
and not very often.
Or 44 goals at 19 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like he's been around for longer. Like he should be older. So I was surprised at first when I heard like Laine Preds. I was like, no. But then I saw he was only 26, and I was like, oh, maybe.
So I want to talk like the strategy decision making process here, and then I want to talk specifically about Laine. And part of the reason I brought up Stamkos a couple of weeks ago on the show was because I do feel like if you're keeping Saros, and Andrew says this as well with Philip, and Josi getting older. Their window is closing sooner than later. Don't want to waste their final years of elite hockey. I think they've got more years than just 1 or 2. I would argue their contracts are pretty long. So I would say that you have to bank on those guys being very good for probably 4 to 5 years more if you're going to do that. And that is sort of, I agree, that is sort of a general window we could talk about, which would also.
I mean, Roman Josi is 34, and we were talking about him in the Norris discussion this year. Like he's still got a lot of good years left.
So I think ultimately what's interesting to me about Laine or Stamkos or some of these guys, it's like, can I rent a guaranteed 40-goal scorer for 2 years while we continue to rebuild? Because it's not going to cost me in Stamkos' situation more than just some money that we've got, cap space. Or in Laine's situation, maybe a bunch of draft picks that, don't help you right now anyway. They maybe help your rebuild. I agree with you, Michael. If you trade Juuse Saros, and I think, I'm not reporting this, I don't have inside information, but I think they're much further away on money than people realize. I think Saros and the Preds are much further away on dollars than people think. And so hypothetically, if you're just like, man, I don't think we can get this done, and you're going to trade Saros, then I'm not interested in any of this stuff. I'm not interested in Stamkos. I'm not interested in Laine. I'm not interested in Marner. I might be interested in Nate just because you can sign him long-term and he's young. But to me, it's like, if you're going to keep Saros and you think you can win a playoff series or two or compete and keep the core you've already got intact, and you can go get Patrick Laine for 3 second-round picks and like they're going to keep $2.7 million of the salary or something, then I think at 26 years old, you get 2 years of what is going to be a very motivated Patrick Laine because he's trying to get that next contract, and you don't have to re-sign him. Like two years of 40 goals from him is worth a couple of second-round picks. Like, it's not, to me, I don't think you're not giving up the future, but you're helping your team immediately, but only if you're keeping Saros. Only if you keep Saros.
Yeah, I think Saros is kind of the linchpin to this whole thing. If you keep him, you're obviously going to be paying him probably $8.5 million a year, somewhere in there. If you trade him, then that frees up the $5 million in cap space that he's already taking. We presume that Askarov will be on the roster. I don't think he'll be the starter. I think he'll be a backup. Don't really know what's happening with Kevin Lingan. I feel like I'm leaning closer towards he's leaving than coming back, just from what I've heard, that he's actually gotten some feelers out there, and there are teams that are interested in maybe not making him the full-time starter, but using him in a 1A, 1B role. So if you trade Saros, that does free up $5 million in cap space that you can throw in there with your already $26 million in cap space that you have. And if you're going younger, then obviously there's cases to be made for going after someone like Laine and not. Like you said, Nate, just because Nate just is young. Like, Laine is only about 9 months older than he is. So if you trade Saros, I don't think the spending big on those kind of guys makes sense, because if you're looking at probably 3 or 4 years before you're competing, and then you have 2 years of Patrick Laine putting up 40 goals, but what good does it do? It doesn't really help you in the scheme of things with where your roster is and stuff. So I think Saros is kind of the linchpin of this whole thing. If you keep him, then that to me signals, okay, there's more of a drive towards competing in the next couple of years. If you trade him, then that signals, okay, that the plan has always been, or the plan is going to be the rebuild, bring some of the Milwaukee guys up, add some young some players. Maybe you target a couple RFAs that are 22, 23, add them into the fold, and you build a younger roster.
I mean, I agree. I mean, 8.7 makes him, again, he'd be if you put the Florida and the Predators roster, the Panthers and the Predators rosters together, he's, you'd have Bobrovsky, Barkov, and Tkachuk all above Josi and Forsberg and Laine. And again, I think the beauty of the Laine, now we can get into the details here. He was asking to play center in Columbus. I do agree with you guys that you have to throw away the Columbus years because it's been a total shit show in Columbus. So I don't know what you make of, like, there are some injury concerns. He did have that weird locker room thing where, like, Blake Wheeler was threatened by his skills when he showed up, and I don't know what that means. You have to believe that Andrew Burnett can
Blake Wheeler's insecure.
Maybe. But also Laine, I mean, look, Laine's got a little Jagger to his game. Like, that's a high compliment, and also sort of okay, are you going to bust it on every single second of every shift? I think that's a question. And I think, Andrew Burnett's demands a lot of his players on every second of every shift, and rightly so. So I think there are things to say, all right, is this worth $9 million a year for us? What I find interesting is the 2 years at his age. And I think if you maximize his ability, he would be very good in Andrew Burnett's system. I think he could be a huge producer in Andrew Brunette's system. But I think the only reason you do that is if you're sure you kind of know what he is for you, and you keep Saros, and you're saying to yourself, I think we can contend right now. Not like for a championship necessarily, but look how good we were last year without a 40-goal scorer. Look how good we could be this year with one big-time winger on the second line. I understand the strategy here, but not if you're trading Saros. Not to repeat myself, but not if you're getting rid of Saros, you gotta commit fully to the rebuild.
Well, I think there's a couple other things too that we're not talking about that are byproducts of adding a player like Laine. If you trade for him, say Columbus retains 40-50%, you're getting him at $4.5-ish million a year, basically. He has 2 years left in his contract. What if he comes here, he puts up 40 goals in both of those seasons and realizes, hey, I like playing for a head coach like Andrew Brunette. I like playing in this kind of system. What if he wants to re-sign? Maybe if it would normally cost you $9 million, maybe you talk him into $8.5 million. I don't know if Barry Trotz would go there because that's a lot of money to pay it forward, but if you have 2 years of proven 40-goal seasons under the head coach you have running the system you have, and it's something that he enjoys and he wants to be here, maybe he gives you the hometown discount to kind of stay there. And also, we presume Laine would probably play on the second line. He's going to elevate Luke Evangelista. He's going to elevate Tommy Novak. He's going to elevate whoever you put on that line with him. Say you put him on the second line, and he's scoring 40 goals, and Luke Evangelista is doing 25 goals, 55, 60 points. Can you lose a player like that in 2 years because he's probably very crucial to playing on a line with some of those guys? And maybe he elevates Tommy Novak to being a 20-goal scorer, 25-goal scorer. Maybe he elevates whoever else you put on that second line. There's a lot of other factors other than just what he can do personally, because I feel like his talent, he's someone who can elevate whoever is on that line. And I'm thinking Luke Evangelista specifically because we've seen Evangelista as a really good playmaker, and he was really coming into his own in a top six role. I mean, I know we're talking about all the stars aligning here basically, but he could pay dividends for the players that he's playing with on his line, and he could also want to stay here because the system that Andrew Brunette runs is set up very well. It's almost tailor-made for a player like Laine because he's aggressive, attacks the puck, he shoots, he puts the puck in net. Like, this is the system that if he's going to score 40 goals, it's probably going to be in a system like this.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fit for Laine. Like, if we're not looking at money right now, I think the fit is, like you said, it makes total sense to me. But again, it hinges on Columbus has to retain for those 2 years. And yes, it would be nice if you can get the hometown discount for, any years beyond that, but I don't know that we can necessarily bank on that. But I mean, you never know. I think that he's a guy that, yes, you're only committed. If you get him, you're only committed for 2 years, but theoretically, like, he's a guy that you would look at as part of your longer term plan beyond 2 years. So you do have to factor that in. Yep. Even if you don't have to pay him $9 million right now, you're probably going to in 2 years. And so that's just something to keep in mind.
Well, and interestingly enough, and this is sort of back to like, well, is it the right strategy for Barry Trotz to just sort of say unequivocally, we're not going to have another big contract on the team? And I don't think that's the right strategy. I think if you're looking at these teams that are winning, you've got three. Largely, you've got three big-name studs. There's not any contracts on this roster outside of Josi and Forsberg that are even over like $5 million. Like, I think Saros is the third highest paid player. So if you want to contend, you're going to need a third big name or a third big contract, and Laine could be that guy. Maybe that's Natchez down the road. Who knows? Maybe it could be any number of other players.
I also think too, the context of when he said that was important. He said that in his first press conference, taking over as general manager, when he had, I don't know, 4 years of mediocre Ryan Johansson and 3 years of mediocre Matt Duchene with one season. You saw with the Duchene, you saw one season of the guy that you paid for. Everything else, he was average at best. And I think when Trotz came in, he said, we're not giving out those kind of contracts anymore because he was comparing it to the production he was getting from those guys. If you trade for Laine and he comes in and puts up 2 40-goal seasons, I think Trotz might be more okay with paying him $9 million because you have the body of work to justify asking for that much money.
I completely agree. So I guess that's my question is, do you think that's partly why he said that and feels that way is because of the situation the Predators are currently in with some other buyouts still on the books? Like, they still are kind of, I don't want to say like playing with like one hand tied behind their back because it's not that much money, but like it is, if you look at what they're paying in dead money, it is basically one big contract for one big player. And if the only reason he feels that way and this team feels that way is because they've got this one giant collection contract that doesn't help them, right? Whether it's Johansson, Duchene, I guess there's a little bit of Matthias Ekholm sprinkled in there as well.
Kyle
but
Turris.
yeah, the tourist still 2 million. Like, is it because he took over? Is it just because of that he says those things and feels that way, or is it more of a indication of his general strategy? Because I think you do have to kind of like, you got to find the right guy and you need another star. If you want to win a cup, you're going to need another star.
Well, I think to Mike's point, I don't think it was that black and white that he's saying we're never going to pay anyone $8 million ever again. I think it's just, right now looking at where the Predators are, and any contract that kind of starts with an 8 makes Preds fans a little twitchy, understandably. And so I think, now that he's offloaded Johansson, he's offloaded Duchesne, now the slate is more or less clean. And that's where, to Mike's point, you need to have like the body of work to kind of prove that you've earned that. Like, we're not just going to hand out $8 million to, like, for example, a Martin Necas. I think, we're not just going to give him $8 million right now to come play for us, because he's still young. He hasn't quite proven that he's earned that yet. The Laine situation is interesting because you could get him at a discount if Columbus retains, and then you kind of give him those 2 years as almost his like audition, like his trial period. And then it's like, okay, well, if he puts up 2 40-goal seasons, that's a guy that has earned an 8, 9, whatever $1 million contract.
Yeah. And I think also by the time the Laine contract, you would need to pay the Laine contract, right? You will have some of this dead money off the books, because that's 3 years from now that you'd have to kick in a new deal. Right. And again, that's maybe a better time to think about what Juuse Saros is going to cost you, because that's the other wild card in all of this. As we've already said, if Saros is a part of this and he gets the big deal, then that's the other star you're paying. Bobrovsky, $10 million, highest paid Panther on the team. He's the other star. Then if you're paying him 8.5 or $8 million, he's the other star. I will go back to the hometown discount.
I think something too with that real quick. The Matt Duchesne buyout looks astronomical right now. Really, after 2025, 26, it's not that bad, because next season you're paying him $5.5 million. The season after that you're paying him $6.5 million. After that, 26, 27, and 28, you're only paying him $1.5 million. He's costing you less than Kyle Turris actually is. So you're looking at when you do eventually, in this theoretical situation, when you would have to pay Patrick Laine 3 seasons from now, basically, you're only going to have what, $3.5 million in dead cap, because Johansson's going to be off that, Ekholm's going to be off that, and Duchesne is going to come down considerably. So really, you only have about $3.5 million. That's a bottom 6 player.
And no, I agree. And I do think we can discuss like the hometown discount thing, but at the end of the day, I actually don't think that amount of money should be the reason you do or don't do the deal. Like, if you think you can get him for 9.25 versus 8.5, I mean, we're talking about $750 there per year. I don't think it matters. Like, you have to decide if this is the right guy, and you think you can get him at around whatever number you think. 9, let's say 9. He's at 8.7 today, and he certainly hasn't necessarily lived up to that. Some of that's not his own doing, but some of that's his own doing. I don't think you have to worry about like the $750,000. Like, that's the reason we're going to re-sign him. No, you got to, if you want to go get him, give him the 2-year trial and say, look, if you perform, you're going to be worth the big deal, and we're going to make the deal work. Whether that's 8.25, 8.5, 9, 9.25, whatever the number is, because you can't let $250,000 or $500,000 be the reason you let an unprecedented player on your team in franchise history walk away. But there's a lot of moving parts here, and I
agree with that too. But also, you have to take in mind, keep in account whatever. Like, agents play a factor in this, and an agent can be whispering in the player's ear like, hey, I know it's only $750,000, but this team's going to pay you a lot more. We can maybe get them another extra year on term and stuff like that. So like, if it was up to the player, like, I could see your motive there, but agents are greedy. They're greedy people. So they're going to be pushing to go where you're going to get paid more money regardless of the fit. They're not always looking out for the player's best interest.
No, I was talking about the Preds side of this. Like, I think you can't, if you go get Patrick Laine and audition him, for lack of a better term, for 2 years, I don't think you should be like internally conflicted about $250,000 or $500,000. Not on the, I agree with you. The agent's going to do the agent's job, but I think the Predators have to say, look, if this guy's clearly worth it, 8.5 versus 9.25, that shouldn't break the deal. If he's the right player to help you win a championship, you have to kind of commit to him as the guy, if that makes sense. I don't know. the hometown discount can't be the reason you don't go trade for him. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm making my point clear. I don't know. The cold medicine's kicking in. All right. I am interested with Laine. What do you guys think the cost would be to go get him?
I think it depends on, not to sound like a broken record, but it depends on how much Columbus is willing to retain.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think if
2.7, make it a $6 million.
I think if Columbus is retaining 30-35%, it's going to obviously cost you more than if they're retaining 40 to 50%. I think let's just go with like 40, and they're gonna eat $3 million of his contract. I don't know if the math works out or whatever, but it's gonna probably cost you at least, I would say, 2 of your 3 second-round picks, and then probably a pretty decent prospect like, I don't even know, Mark Del Gaizo, Ryan Ufko, someone like that. They're gonna want a young player back, and they're gonna want some draft picks to kind of replenish their farm system. So I mean, if they're gonna be eating a couple $1 million, they're gonna probably ask for a little bit more than they probably should. And I guess it's up to the Preds to decide if they want to pay that. But probably at least multiple second-round picks, and then probably a pretty decent prospect. It would be my best guess.
Yeah, I was gonna say for sure those second-round picks have got to be part of it. At least 2 of them, like you said, because you really don't need that many if you're Nashville. Yeah.
What if they said, "Look, we're not going to keep any salary, but the asking price is lower"? Do you think about it? 2 seconds and that straight up, and you get Laine. You wouldn't do it,
but because they wouldn't do that.
If that was the case, if they said we're not retaining salary but the ask is lower, I'd be like, okay, you get a 5th-round pick and that's all we're going. Like anything like a 2nd-round pick and you're taking on all 8.7 million, that's too rich for my blood.
Yeah.
40 goals for $8.7 million is about the going rate.
Just because you can afford it doesn't mean you should do it.
But if he's the right fit, who cares about the cap space? It ain't our money. Like,
okay, so
on paper, he's the right fit, but we don't know if the results are going to be there. At the beginning of the season, I ate crow because I was beating my chest saying this coach is the right coach for fucking Philip Tomasino, and look what happened to him this year. So it might be the right fit. We don't know.
That's a segue into what I was about to throw out there. What if for Laine, if they, let's say Columbus retains 40%, give or take, 2 second-round picks and Phil Tomasino?
Yeah, in 2 seconds.
I do it.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, in half a second.
Because I think that Laine and Tomasino are 2 guys who can both benefit. I mean, obviously Laine because he's asked for it, but like both guys could hugely benefit from a change of scenery trade. And I think that, for Tomasino trying to get to play into that elevated role that the Predators had, expected for him, I think he's got more of a direct pathway to do that in Columbus than he does with Nashville right now. And he's not going to be waivers exempt next year. So if you're Nashville, you're not going to be able to keep sending him up and down without risking an Ellie Tolvanen situation. So I think, for me, Tomasino, and I know Preds fans love him. He's a fan favorite because he had that great rookie season, and people aren't willing to let go of that. But I think that you got to be realistic about it and look at, like, he is actually a very sneaky good trade piece, I think.
I would
too, he would have a clean slate in Columbus, whereas if he's here, he's always going to have the expectations that he hasn't met. He's always going to have the stigma of he's talented, but X, Y, and Z. You send him to Columbus, he's going in with a new head coach, new teammates, new system, everything, and it's going to be, okay, we're going to try you here, and then you either prove to us you can do it or not, and we'll adjust from there. If he stays here and he gets called up, it's going to be like, okay, I know last year you struggled with this, let's work on this. He's always going to have something that he's trying to fight back against in Nashville, I feel like.
Yeah.
Honestly, if they gave him Tomasino and a 3rd, I would take all 8.7. I just, what are you going to do with $2 million? Like, you're going to go win a cup with $2 million? I mean, I don't know.
Give it to Saros.
Well, but you don't need that. You don't need it this year. Like this year, you don't need it. I'm just saying, like, you got $24 million in cap space. The $2 million, the $3 million here or there. I don't want that to ruin the deal if he's the right player. That's all I'm saying. Like if he's the right guy to help build a team into a contender, and I'm not so I mean, I don't know if he is or not. Michael, you just said you're not sure about the fit. Like there's injuries, there's fit, there's personality.
I think the fit is good. I don't know if the results are going to match the fit.
I think if he busted his ass and played the way Andrew Brunette wants him to play, I think he would score a shit ton of goals in this system.
I could see him having a Philip Forsberg type season this year if they traded for him. But also, we don't know where he's at. He's still in the player assistance program. Like we don't know where he's at mental health wise. I would assume by the beginning of next season he's going to be out of the program and he's going to be ready to go and stuff. But there's still, they're not huge question marks, but there are still some question marks around him. So like I said, the fit is perfect. It lines up, but just because it works on paper doesn't mean that it's going to work here. I mean, he could come here and the locker room could reject him because they think he's a diva or whatever. Like there could be a Blake Wheeler in the locker room here. We don't know. There's so many things that could affect all of that. I would, if I had to put money on it, I would bet if they traded for him, he would be a 40 goal scorer here. But again, we don't really know.
No, I agree. And honestly, he's just this week's stand-in for what are the Predators going to do? Like a couple weeks ago, it's Mitch Marner. Last week, I thought it was Steven Stamkos. We can go around and round and round in circles on this because it's what is the strategy that Barry Trotz wants to deploy? Does he think this team can contend for a division if he goes and gets a big goal scorer? Is he trying to get a younger piece? Is he trying to get a veteran for just a couple of years to rent? Is he trading Saros and rebuilding fully? Like it's a fascinating period of time here over the next few weeks because if they're going to trade Saros, it probably happens in the next month. And if they're going to re-sign him, it probably happens in the next month. You've got a draft with a ton of picks. I have no idea what direction they're going to go over the course of the next 3 weeks.
I think it has to, like we said earlier, it all comes back to Saros. I think what you do with Saros is going to indicate what your strategy is going forward. And until that happens, whether it's a trade or a new contract or whatever, I think the Predators are always going to pop up in these rumors of like whenever anyone becomes available, Marner, Stamkos, Laine, right. Whoever, the Predators are always listed as like a possible destination. Why? Because they have cap space. And just because they have the cap space, does that alone isn't going to do it. But since Barry Trotz hasn't come out and said this is our strategy, whether he's going to say it with words or with actions, like signing or trading Saros, then I think that as long as that kind of remains a mystery, then the Predators are always going to be linked, quote unquote, linked to these big names on the trade or free agent market.
Yeah. And I also think too, I mean, we keep talking like, what are the Predators going to do? We know they're on the hunt for offense. I don't necessarily think that all that offense is going to come from forwards. Because when you look at when Barry Trotz was the coach here, and I mentioned this last week, traditionally 30 to 35% of the Predators' offenses come from their blue line. Right now, it's basically Roman Josi and then whoever can help out occasionally. I wouldn't be surprised if they go out and they get someone like Montour, like Brady Shea, that can give you 40 to 50 points a season. And I just feel like that's how Barry Trotz coached. I know Andrew Brunette is completely different, and Barry Trotz is not the coach, he's the GM. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him go out and acquire, whether it's trading or signing our UFAs, anybody. I wouldn't be surprised to go out and see him get a couple of defensemen that can put up points, just because that's traditionally how Barry Trotz's teams have been. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I don't think I think they upgrade the offense, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be because they signed two big name forwards. I think they're going to get a defenseman that can put the puck in the net too.
Well, and I want to, I've said a lot of times on this show, like Juuse Saros is by far your best trade chip. He is by far the thing that would bring the most in return. And he would pour like jet fuel on the rebuild. Like that's sort of what he is to this organization, especially with Askarov in the wings. But if you re-sign him and you announce that, and he's got a 5-year extension for whatever, $40 million, 8 years per, $8 million per, like you've decided what your path is. You're at the fork in the road here, and you decide what the path is. Then I'm all for trading Askarov. Go maximize his availability and his value, and go trade him and go get some offense because you're giving up the best goalie prospect in the world right now. Like I think it does all go back to Saros. It's just
I've spoken to a couple people that believe that if Saros is re-signed, that Askarov is very much on the trade block, and we saw it last year. We knew that Barry Trotz was dangling him out there trying to get him in the top 5. I don't think that's the case now, but if New Jersey's still willing to give you the 10th pick for Askarov and you just re-sign Saros to a 5 or 6 year deal, that makes all the sense in the world, because you can either go out and you can draft one of those forwards that we're talking about, or then all of a sudden you have the 10 and the 22 pick. Maybe you can package those and move up into the top 5 if there's a player you really want there. That opens a lot of possibilities. So I think, again, Saros is the key to the offseason until they make a decision whether they're going to re-sign him, or if they don't re-sign him and they're content with just letting him play out next season. I think that tells you what you need to know. Like, clearly it's going to be Askarov, and they're going to try to trade him probably around the deadline. It was what I would guess.
Yeah. I think we all agree on that part. We can't figure out where they're going to go and evaluate decisions until the Saros situation is worked out. It's not a terrible spot to be in, though. If you're Barry Trotz and you're a Preds fan, you have a chance to sort of lock your starter in and maybe, quote unquote, go for it, and maybe think you've already done enough rebuilding to be a quality hockey team moving forward and compete, because Burnett looks like the guy and a lot of players flourished in his system last year. Or trade your best give away your best chip, bring a whole lot back in return. Maybe know that you're going to have a struggle this particular season as Askarov gets up to speed, but that the turnaround shouldn't take that long. Like next year, 2 years from now, you've got a roster loaded with young talent that has done the losing it needs to do to be very, very good. So it's not a bad place for Predators fans to be. It's impossible to know and evaluate the strategic decisions until something is decided with Saros. It just is what it is. Okay. All right. So the draft is next week. Again, announcement coming on Monday. We're gonna have a lot of coverage for you next week, so stay tuned. But any random, we're gonna do mostly draft next week on the show. But do you guys have any random draft observations, things that are floating around in the old noggin there now that we're about a week and a half out, 10 days out?
No, I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow took a defenseman in the first round. I don't think if they take a defenseman, I'll caveat that by saying I think they're going to have multiple first round picks, but I wouldn't be surprised if they came away with the defenseman. Just some random things I'm hearing, and I'll have, I guess a draft notebook or whatever next week. But I think some things I'm hearing is Askarov is very much in play. I've heard that the Predators have been making calls because they do want to trade up from 22, whether that is acquiring a second first round pick or whether that's moving up from 22 into the top 10, into the top 15, whatever it is. I've heard they've been making calls trying to see where they could land potentially if a Berkeley Catton or a Tija Ginla or Cade Lindstrom or someone like that does fall. Maybe Demidov is someone they target. But I would watch for them to be aggressive in trying to trade up. I don't think as aggressive as last year when Trotz was trying to get into the top 5. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them, if they do trade up, land somewhere in the 8 to 14 range, somewhere in there, just from what I've been hearing from people I've talked to.
I mean, if you're New Jersey, you kind of know that, right? You could move Askarov for the 10th pick. Worst case scenario. I mean, you have to feel pretty good about signing Saros at that point. But trading up is not, I don't think that's a bad idea with all the capital you've got. So, especially if a big name player starts to slip, which happens almost every year. It just depends on how far that player slips, and then we'll see what happens. So, Emma, any final thoughts on the draft? I mean, we've got next week's episode to sort of dissect a lot of players, give you guys some primers, but any strategies that you're feeling passionate about 10 days out?
No, I do think that we see the Predators make at least one trade at the draft. I feel like you said, they've got the capital to do it. I don't know if it'll be like a big blockbuster kind of situation, but I think that we should expect, because I know last year at the draft people were wondering, kind of expecting a lot, and I think I don't know, the biggest trade at the draft last year was when Tampa traded Corey Perry to Chicago. It was really, that's it. So I think that we're gonna see more this year, and yeah, I definitely feel more confident saying that the Preds are going to make a trade this year than I would have last year.
Yeah. I can't see them making 3 second-round picks either.
Yeah. No. And they have so many picks next year that are just as high. Just remember, they have two first, 2 seconds, 2 thirds next year. It's okay to give up a bunch of picks. You still have 2 first-round picks next year. You're still going to get a lot of quality prospects filling the system up. So It's a fascinating time to be a fan, and
I think something to watch too. And I know Trotz was running the show, quote unquote, last year, but David Poile was still advising, and that was still a David Poile influenced draft. I'm curious to see what Barry Trotz's first solo draft class looks like.
You think David Poile is not helping at all though this time?
I mean,
I see him every time I go to the building. He's there.
I'm sure he's probably texting him like, "Hey, this kid from Boston College or whatever, I really like him or whatever." But like we saw, they made the Aiden Fink pick because it was David Poile's last official draft pick, and there were some of the players like, to me, the Matthew Wood pick was a Barry Trotz selection. The Tanner Molendyk pick, that was a David Poile selection. Like I could see the David Poile influence in the draft class. I'm not saying that Trotz didn't have 100% final say, but I'm curious to see what this class looks like because this is all Jeff Kelty and Barry Trotz.
No, I agree. I just think he's not a bad asset to have just lying around the building. You know,
no, definitely not. I'm not saying that.
What do you think about this guy?
Yeah, I'm not saying Poile's influence was a bad thing, but I could see the David Poile fingerprints on last year's draft class. I want to see what Barry Trotz does when he does not have David Poile in the building to be like, hey, what do you think of this guy?
All right. We're pretty close. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening over the next 3 weeks. Could involve some big news with Saros. Obviously, a big draft coming up next week. We'll talk to you guys next week. Where can everybody find you, folks? Emma, where can they find you?
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan. You can find my work at the Hockey News. And next week, you can find me at the Sphere for the draft because I will be there.
I doubt they're having any concerts in and around the draft, but man, I would love to see. I heard the Grateful Dead shows were just like incredible, and I'm not a huge Grateful Dead fan, but
you should do a man on the street and ask random people how much they would pay to see you two in concert, and see if anyone goes below me.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really wish that U2 was performing so I could pay $5 just to go see them.
Well, shout out to you and Gover because I agreed with what you guys were talking about on It's All Your Fault this week. If someone in the production truck does not have U2 music queued up and ready to go when the Predators are on the clock at any point or are even mentioned in the draft, then you're not doing your job, TV production team. Okay?
Yeah, like what are you even doing?
You got to have Beautiful Day like ready to go. You got to have it ready to go. Streets Have No Name, just something. I would certainly pay more than $5 to go see U2. All right. Michael, where can they find you?
Find me on Twitter at MGSports_, and you can find my draft coverage somewhere next week.
There you go. That's how you do it. For Emma and Michael, I am Braden Gall. Thank you guys all for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, we do appreciate you guys as well. And give us a little thumbs up there. Give us a little subscription. We do appreciate it. It's how people find us, and it means a lot to us. So thank you for that. And, of course, if you're listening on the podcast app, Twitter or Facebook, also share those shows as well. It's real easy. A couple of taps on the phone. You're good to go. So for Michael and Emma, I'm Braden. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you guys next week.